Hello student leaders and welcome to the de-escalation module. We will be talking about navigating power dynamics and approaching from a place of care. The session learning outcomes for this module are as follows. Student leaders will learn how to de-escalate a situation within the residence halls. Student leaders will be given the tools to approach and work with residents from a place of care. Student leaders will learn the importance of showing up with cordiality within their roles. Before we begin, I'm going to be presenting a scenario step by step throughout the entire presentation. I'm going to give you a series of options by which you can choose from, and I'm going to give you the preferred approach at the end of every slide as we move forward. So let's continue. And the scenario is, one of your residents sees you walking in the halls and immediately starts to tell you about an intruder they saw just sitting in one of the floor lobbies and is pushing you to call Campus Public Safety, CPSO. What would you do? Number 1, thank the resident for telling you and call CPSO immediately. Number 2, thank the resident for letting you know, ask for a description of the person, what floor the person is on, and let the resident know that you will look into it. You will also take the information from the resident who reported the incident to you. Or number 3, ignore the resident because the person they are reporting is just hanging out in the lobby and is not bothering anyone. The recommended approach is going to be number 2. Thank the resident for letting you know, ask for a description of the person, what floor the person is on, and let the resident know that you will look into it. You will also ask to take the information from the resident who reported the incident to you. We want to avoid calling CPSO immediately because we don't know if the person they are reporting is a resident or not. And at the time, it sounds like the person in the floor is not really bothering anyone. They're just kind of sitting in the lobby. So at this point, it doesn't tell me that CPSO is needed. So we need to do a little bit more investigation before we get there. We also don't want to ignore the resident because the person they are reporting, although they're just hanging out, we still want to verify that they're a resident, especially if they haven't been seen in that floor before. You are now on the 8th floor lobby, and you see a 50-something-year-old woman on her phone just sitting in the lobby area by herself. What would you do? Number 1, ask the person to leave the building or that you will need to call CPSO. Number 2, introduce yourself as a student leader. Number 3, ask the person if they are a resident. The recommended approach is to introduce yourself as a student leader. We don't know if this person is a resident or not, so we want to approach from a place of care and cordiality and introduce ourselves. If we immediately go to ask a person to leave the building or that we'll need to call CPSO, it's very confrontational and hostile for that person, especially if they are a resident. We don't want to be approaching someone with that attitude. We want to confirm, we want to introduce ourselves before we move forward. And sometimes asking the resident first if they are a resident, you kind of catch them off guard if they're just sitting there and you're just like, are you a resident out of nowhere? So we want to start off by introducing ourselves as a student leader. You have decided to introduce yourself to the person. How would you go about doing so? Number 1, hi, I'm a student leader in this building and I was just informed about an intruder in the building and I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Number 2, hi, my name is, insert your name here, and I'm a student leader in this building. I don't think I've had the pleasure to meet you yet. What's your name? Or number 3, hi, I'm a student leader in this building, and residents don't want you in the building, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I will have to call CPSO. The recommended approach is number 2. You want to start by introducing yourself and letting them know, hey, I haven't had the pleasure to meet you. What's your name? Give them the opportunity to introduce themselves as well. Number 1, you're letting them know that they were informed about an intruder, and you are assuming that they are the intruder and you're asking them to leave, but you still haven't confirmed whether they're a resident or not. You're immediately jumping to asking them to leave. And number 3, that pretty much does the same thing. But not only that, you're saying that residents don't want you in the building, and if you don't leave, we're going to have to call CPSO. You're still you still haven't confirmed that they're a resident, and you're already asking them to leave, and you're telling them that they're not welcome in the building without even confirming that they're a resident. So the preferred option is going to be number 2. The person responds, "Hi, my name is Lindsay, and yours? How will you proceed?" Number 1, "Nice to meet you, Lindsay. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building." Number 2, "Nice to meet you, Lindsay. Who's the RA on your floor?" Or number 3, "It was nice meeting you, Lindsay, but I have to get back to doing my homework." The recommended approach is number 2. "Nice to meet you, Lindsay. Who's the RA on your floor?" Why? Because you're acknowledging their introduction, and you're asking a step further. Rather than going to conclusions right away, you want to ask who's the RA on the floor. This will give you more information on whether they are a resident or not. Number 1, again, immediately jumps into asking them to leave. Yes, you've gotten their name, but now you're immediately asking them to leave without confirming they are a resident. And number 3, acknowledges their presence, but it's not really confronting the situation at hand. It's not your investigation ends there. So it's like, "Hi, nice to meet you. I'm going back to do my homework." So the recommended approach is number 2. The person gives you the name of an RA in your building and corroborates the floor they live in with the respective RA of that floor. How would you proceed? Number 1, "It was a pleasure meeting you, Lindsay, and thank you for chatting with me. I have to head out now. I hope you have a great rest of your night." Number 2, "How did you find that information out?" Or number 3, "OMG, I received a call about an intruder and I was worried I was going to have to ask you to leave." The recommended approach is number 1. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Lindsay, and thank you for chatting with me. I have to head out now. I hope you have a great rest of your night." Here you have introduced yourself, you have found out the resident's name, and you have confirmed that the RA that they're giving you, the name of the RA is actually someone who lives on the floor, and it's corroborated with the floor. Number 2 doesn't allow for the space to assume that they are actually a resident. You're questioning that information that they've got, which is accurate information in this case. And number 3, "OMG, I received a call about an intruder." That's really not necessary. The resident you are confronting doesn't necessarily need to know that you are responding to an intruder call or an intruder tip. You just simply need to say, "Oh, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for chatting with me. I have to head out now." They don't necessarily need to know the details on why you went and introduce yourself. You can just make it casual, like you're walking in the floor and then you saw someone and you just want to talk to them. You don't have to tell them why you're there necessarily, unless they don't comply, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Once you leave the scene, you decide to go back to your room and double check on StarRes. Once on StarRes, their picture pops up with the name they gave you confirming that they are a resident. What would you do next? Number 1, go to sleep and be thankful it was a resident and not an actual intruder. Number 2, email the resident who reported the incident to you and tell them that the person that they reported was actually a non-traditional student who lives within the halls, and to feel free to introduce himself next time they see them. That you can understand their concerns as they may have not been aware of non-traditional students living in their halls, but that CPSO won't be necessary. Or number 3, email the resident who reported the incident and tell them to stop wasting your time, that reports to CPSO are for emergencies only. Here, number 2 is the recommended approach. We want to make sure that we're following up with the resident that reported the issue to us, and making sure that we're following up with them and letting them know how everything turned out. It's also important to educate our students. In this case, you might have cases where you live in a building where it's predominantly FYE, like in Broadway, we have predominantly most of the building is FYE, but we also have transfers, we have reentry students, non-traditional students that are 25 and older, and sometimes students that are traditional may not realize this, so it's important that we educate them on who else is in their community as well. Now, Let's say that the person declined to give you their name and that they also gave you a name of an RA that did not coincide with any student leader in the building. What would you do? Number one, well, I'm going to have to call CPSO then. Number two, we don't have an RA by that name here. Are you a resident of this building? Or number three, well, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the building. In this case, we would select number two. We don't have an RA by that name here. Are you a resident of this building? Here, you're confronting it head on. You are acknowledging that they're giving you the wrong name, and you're also following up with a direct question this time. Are you a resident of this building? Because you're giving me information that is not accurate. We want to avoid going straight to number one. Well, we're going to have to call CPSO. Sometimes residents may decline to give you their personal name for whatever the reason. But if they decline to give you the name and they're giving you a wrong name of the RA, you are encouraged to ask the following question and say, are you a resident in this building? If they question that, you can say, I'm a student leader and I'm just making sure that you're a resident of the building. And number three immediately assumes that they're not a resident and you're asking them to leave. So we want to continue to do that investigative work and at least give them the opportunity to answer the question if they are a resident of this building or not. The person then proceeds to tell you that they are not a resident and that they are actually waiting for their friend to come back from class so they can hang out. What would you do? Number one, you are getting your friend in trouble because you're not supposed to be here by yourself. Number two, that's cool that you will be hanging out with your friend once they get back. However, it is housing policy that all guests must be escorted by their hosts at all times while they're in the building. So I'm going to have to escort you outside of the building, and when your friend gets here, you can come back in with them. Or number three, you are violating housing policy. You can't be here. You need to leave the building. The recommended approach is going to be number two. Why? Because you are stating that they are violating housing policy, you're stating what the policy is, and you're also asking to escort them outside of the building. Number one, you're just saying that you're getting their friend in trouble and you're not really telling them why. You're just asking them, you're just telling them that they're going to get in trouble and that's it. Number three goes straight, so you're violating the policy, you can't be here, you need to leave. You're not telling them why they're violating policy, you're not telling them why they can't be there, and you're not telling them why they need to leave. Number two addresses all of those and it does it in a cordial way. The person apologizes for not being aware of the policy and complies to you escorting them out of the building. How would you proceed? Number one, if you wouldn't have complied, I would have called CPSO. Number two, thank you for understanding and for cooperating with me. And so long as you are always escorted by your host, you are always welcome into our building as a guest. Number three, I knew you were an intruder. I have never seen you here. Here, the recommended approach is number two. We want to let the person know, first we want to thank the person for cooperating with us, and we also want to let them know that they're always welcome in the building as a guest, so long as they're always escorted by their host. We want to treat our residents with cordiality as much as their guests, but we just need to make sure that they're always escorted. So we need to make sure that we're treating them just as cordial as their hosts. To wrap up, in both of the cases we covered, we effectively de-escalated the situation from needing CPSO. CPSO was not needed as no one was in any physical danger and the person was compliant with you. If the person had not been compliant or was rude to you, know that you can always call professional staff on call for guidance. In the rare event that the person was threatening you or any of our residents, then you can go ahead and call CPSO immediately and then call professional staff on call afterwards. With the recommended approaches, we ensure that we treated the person we were working with cordiality at every step of the way, whether they were a resident or not. We addressed the reporting residents' concerns and we gave them the update about the situations once we resolved the issue and thanked them for reporting it to you. And that's it. Congratulations, you've made it through this module.